Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Francisco Gonzalez with National Review Institute. Apologize for the delays here. Of course, coordinating various schedules is always challenging. But we are looking forward to a great conversation today between Daniel Tenreiro of National Review, as well as Mayor Francis Suarez, Miami Mayor Francis Suarez. Before we get started, just wanted a couple housekeeping notes. First of all, many of you might be familiar with National Review magazine, which was founded in 1955 by William F. Buckley Jr., really the beginning of the conservative movement, bringing together many different voices on the right onto the pages of a print magazine, National Review. Advanced to 1991, and Buckley and some of the other supporters of National Review started National Review Institute, a nonprofit organization that basically helps support some of the major talent at National Review, as well as some of the programs that we do around the country, including this one, to foster some great conversations and dialogue on many different issues facing the American public. So we really appreciate you joining us. Every year, we also, I should say every other year, we do an idea summit, usually in Washington, D.C., but of course this year is a different kind of year, and so we won't be doing that in person in Washington, D.C., but next week, February 18th, we will be doing a virtual Idea Summit Part 1. So please join us. You can go to our website, nrinstitute.org. There will be a ticket purchase for that, just $25, and there's also some sponsorship opportunities. We have joining us Senator Tom Cotton, as well as an array of other conservative leaders, including some of the top talent at National Review. So I hope you'll join us for some of those important conversations, and then there'll be a Part 2 later in the spring. Also, many of the programs that we do around the country involve connecting with allied organizations and other organizations on many conversations like this. We partner with many state think tanks, and I just wanted to give a shout out since I'm actually based in Florida myself. I live in Orlando, currently in South Florida today. But my previous employer, actually, James Madison Institute, is the state think tank here in Florida. And please, if you're in Florida, connect with them. And I think a few of them may be on the call today, but they do some really great work here, providing free market solutions in Florida. And I hope you will connect with them. And if you're watching this from outside of Florida, we also hope you'll connect with some of the other great organizations through the State Policy Network there. But for now, let me go ahead and introduce our great speakers. First, as part of our National Review Capital Matters project, which is a new project just started last summer. Basically, we have a whole new section in National Review and nationalreview.com that's focused on financial and economic news coverage with an NR sensibility. And so as part of that team, we have Daniel Tenreiro, who's going to be with us today. National Review Capital Matters is also a project sponsored by National Review Institute. And Daniel is also the Thomas Rhodes Journalism Fellow at National Review Institute. This is if you're a National Review Institute supporter, I want to let you know that you're supporting great rising talent like Daniel through the fellowship that he's on board with us as he's placed in a writing position at National Review. And he's been a real star already in the last year or so, editing NR's economic and business community and commentary at National Review Capital Matters. He wrote an article just in the last 2 months, actually on Mayor Francis Suarez and what the mayor is doing to lure big tech titans to South Florida and specifically to Miami. The mayor was elected in 2017 with 86% support from Miami residents. Prior to that, he served on the commission, the Miami City Commission for District 4 for 8 years. He's married to his wife, Gloria, and they have a son and a daughter. He's an FIU grad and a UF Law grad. And I should mention, Daniel went to the same school as our founder, William F. Buckley, Yale. So anyway, we've got some great talent here, and I'm going to turn this conversation over now to Daniel. And just one caution, if you have any questions to submit to us during the conversation, please email them to events@nrinstitute.org, events@nrinstitute.org. And we'll try to ask your question on here. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Daniel to lead the conversation. Thank you guys both for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Francisco, and thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks especially to Mayor Suarez. I know
You have an extremely busy schedule. It seems like everybody I know in business and tech wants to fly down for a meeting with you. So I'm pleased that you were able to join us. I think last time we spoke, you were probably, that was in December, and it seems like you were maybe in the middle of phase one of this initiative, which was you generated buzz, you started to have conversations with investors and entrepreneurs. Could you just, for the sake of our audience, which maybe hasn't followed as closely, tell us what's changed in the past few months since you kind of started this push to attract more businesses to Miami?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. And thank you for the article that you wrote. I thought it was a great recitation of where we were in that moment. I think where we've gone from that moment is we've come to the realization, I think the country has come to the realization that Miami is sort of the place to be. There is a combination of a flywheel effect and a FOMO effect. I call it FlyMo, where you have, the more people that come, the more people that are coming. And then you have a fear of missing out. Impact of people from both New York and from Silicon Valley who are saying we have to be in Miami right now. We need to be there because everything that's happening of consequence is happening there. And so we've never seen a confluence of capital come from those two different markets, mega markets, and join themselves in one area. So the sky is the limit in terms of what that could mean for the city of Miami. We have a tremendous growth envelope. But ever since we spoke, you've had a continuing stream of tech founders and finance companies locating here in Miami or taking big positions in Miami. The lists are basically endless and essentially everybody. And I've been privileged enough to speak to most of them, if not all of them, from Peter Thiel to Keith Rabois, to of course Elon Musk that I spoke with last Friday about the possibility of doing some boring tunnels in the city of Miami. So from my perspective, it's about doing the opposite of what some of these other cities are doing, frankly. While other cities are taxing their residents to death and are essentially pushing out the productive and the innovative class, we're actually doing the opposite. We're asking that innovative class to come here, help us to diversify our economy, create high-paying jobs, and allow us to transition fully as a city into the knowledge-based economy, which, by the way, is here and is coming whether we like it or not, whether we are from one ideological spectrum or another. So it's really mostly about not just preparing my city in terms of my generation, our generation, for the jobs of today and tomorrow, but it's also about preparing the city for my children's generation and my unborn grandchildren. So that's what this movement means to us.
Sure. So to get into some of the specifics, you mentioned talking to Elon Musk. Why, just out of curiosity, why Boring Company? Why the tunnels? I think part of what people have been wondering is the income tax is this, or the lack thereof, is this kind of great anchor to start bringing people in. But then, if you're going to build a tech base, you need some sort of kind of concrete vision of what's going to happen, which I don't think that you as the mayor necessarily need to provide, but you just need to kind of foster the conditions that can let that emerge. But it does seem like you have, between the boring tunnels and Bitcoin, which I'll get into, I'm really interested to hear more about that. There is a kind of a more concrete vision of exactly the kinds of technologies that you want to bring into the city. And I wonder if you could elaborate. Maybe you could start with the tunnels, and then we could get into Bitcoin.
Sure. And if I can just sort of take a step back and say, as mayor, what I view my role is essentially as a convener and as a visionary, right? I mean, the people of the city elect me to guide them forward, right? Understanding that what we all understand, that government is not it's not built to solve every problem or to substitute itself for the private sector, the philanthropic sector. At best, if you have a good leader, you can have someone that knows how to harness the private sector and the philanthropic sector and get it moving in the same direction. So I see myself as that person, as someone who can convene people. We created, one of the first things we did was we created what I call a back end, which is Venture Miami. And Venture Miami is, we brought someone from Florida International University, who was their head of advancement, is now the mayor's senior advisor for technology and innovation. We brought in people from the Downtown Development Authority. We have an economic development internal person. We have our chief innovation officer. So we brought all these sort of superstars together so that when a company wants to locate here, we're going to make some big announcements over the next few weeks of companies that are locating here. We're making it as easy as possible. We're doing a concierge service for domiciling. We're making sure that they know how to get connected to the right people so that they can get whatever, if there is an incentive, to the extent that there is one, that they can get connected to that. Not that that's something that we necessarily focus a lot on, but to the extent that it exists, we want them to be able to take advantage of it. And we built a back end to do that. In terms of the Boring Company and Elon, it all started innocently. And this kind of goes to a point I was making in another podcast that I did today, which is, as a mayor of a big city, what all these mayors need to realize is they have the ability to reach just about anybody, and in my particular case, I was up in the middle of the night. It was 4:00 in the morning. Elon had put out a tweet. I responded to his tweet and he responded to my tweet. And the tweet was about the possibility of boring tunnels to help with emissions and traffic. And we were able to, I spoke to the CEO of the Boring Company, a person named Steve Davis, who's phenomenal. I'm actually going to fly to Las Vegas to see the technology in person. But the idea was, to create a solution that was small in scale, but easy to do and fast, and as a proof of concept. And because I'm going to become the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors in January of next year, the idea is if it could work in Miami, this could be something that we can scale nationally. And all major cities are struggling with transportation and traffic issues. And what's interesting about the Boring Company's financial proposition is that it is significantly less expensive than all other transportation modes like light rail, heavy rail, and underground subway. So I'm when the world's richest person wants to have a virtual coffee with you, right, and spend 30 minutes talking about how he can bring, in his words, happiness to our city by creating a solution, I think it's wise to listen.
Yeah, I think part of your appeal and part of what's fascinating about this whole story is how easy it was. I mean, all you really did was send a couple tweets, and even now, like you said, when we have so many. I'm here in New York, which is not the friendliest city to business, and I think that it's not that hard to compete with cities that are actively trying to make people miserable. So, but on this Bitcoin question, I'm really interested. So, because it seems like you, for Boring Company, you've actually looked at the financial model. You're delving more into detail rather than just kind of symbolically welcoming Elon and the company. And on Bitcoin, this is kind of your announcement, whether it ends up on the municipal balance sheet or not. I found this kind of a fascinating, a kind of groundbreaking story. So if you could explain, and I know that you've been, you're in touch with Apology and other figures in the crypto community. So if you could just elaborate on what specifically you find compelling about the technology, sure, Bitcoin specifically, and why it would work for a city like Miami.
So I would say two things just to sort of start on that. One is that I was involved in Bitcoin and blockchain technology prior to this moment. And so, now it's becoming obviously something that everybody talks about and it's very much in vogue, but I was on the Florida Blockchain Foundation, several years ago. I was asked to be on the Florida Blockchain Task Force that was created by the governor and the CFO of Florida. I was the CFO's appointee several years ago. So my work in this space predates this moment. But I've always believed in it for two reasons. First, like you said, I believed in the mathematical principles that underlie and the concepts that underlie the technology, right? Which is essentially twofold. One, on the cryptocurrency space that, and by the way, I this is an interesting but maybe earth-shattering premonition maybe for your viewers, is cryptocurrency. They call it cryptocurrency. It sounds very mysterious, but it's really no different than what we have right now. And I'll explain to you what I mean. When you go to see how much money's in your bank account, you don't walk over to your bank physically, and then there's not like a little space in the bank where they say, oh, here are your dollars. They're right there. They're stacked up. You know what I mean? No, what you do is you go online and you put in your username and your password, and you see a number, right? And that's essentially what you have in the bank. That's your electronic representation of what you have in the bank. I think the difference here is that with Bitcoin, they've created a decentralized and traceable currency that cannot be, for lack of a better word, manipulated by a federal authority, right? That it is free flowing. And the second thing that they did to it, which is I think appealing to a lot of conservatives, is that they made it finite, right? So there's 21 million Bitcoin and that's it. There's a finite money supply. So when you think about deficit spending, when you think about monetary policy, which is, manipulation of interest rates, when you think about fiscal policy, which is, like I said, deficit spending and stimulus spending, a lot of conservatives are very attracted to Bitcoin because it doesn't do any of that. It doesn't allow for the manipulation of the currency. It doesn't allow for the expansion of the supply. And so that's why it's appealing. And at the end of the day, if you think about it, it's no different than saying, whatever, we can decide anything is a currency. We can, and like I said, in the electronic space, all you're doing is counting ones and zeros, right? Or, numbers, numerical numbers. So it's really not as complicated as people maybe think it is, or as it's made out to be. What we're doing in the city, we're doing a few things. The first thing is, when I began this whole tech push, I realized that within tech, there was a sub-community of crypto that was incredibly robust, incredibly plugged in, very smart, and very positive. And so every time I would tweet something about crypto, it would go viral. And I realized that there was a signaling and sort of a public, almost, I don't want to say marketing because that sounds wrong, but it's sort of a signaling effect every time you did something that in some ways outweighed or punched above the weight of what you would expect to see, for talking about any particular subject. And I'll give you an example. When I simply put out Satoshi's white paper. Satoshi's white paper, Satoshi is the fictional person, the anonymous person that created Bitcoin, that created sort of the concept of Bitcoin. Just putting it on my website, I got more impressions on that tweet. I got like 3 million impressions than I did in the How Can I Help tweet, which was what started all the virality of this conversation. So, for me, I understood very intimately, just like I understood there was no public official that was doing what I was doing right now. And to the extent that anybody was talking about it, they were doing the opposite of what I was doing and the wrong thing. I also realized very quickly that there was a huge opportunity to be talking thoughtfully in this space. And so we are trying to accomplish 3 things. One is we want to allow our employees to be able to take a percentage of their salary in Bitcoin. That's something that's already happening, right? You have a football player that famously asked for 50% of his salary in Bitcoin. Number 2, you want, we want our residents to be able to potentially pay for things, right? Whether it's fees and taxes on Bitcoin. We want them to be able to use it as a payment method. It's very easy to do. It's being done in counties in Florida, in Seminole County. So it's not uncharted territory. And the third thing is we want to consider at least the possibility of holding it as an asset in our treasury. We hold many assets, and that's one of the ones that we want to consider. I think that is the one that generates the most buzz. But you just saw Elon Musk take a massive position on Bitcoin, about $1.5 billion, and that increased the price. I think as of yesterday, it was at 46.5. I don't know what it's at today, but it went up, almost 25%.
Sure. So it's both a way of signaling that you're friendly to emerging technologies, as well as a kind of belief in the underlying technology, and maybe even a belief in the need for a fixed currency and a stable currency. Do you think that is there anything, what else are you doing to integrate technology into the way you're governing Miami? I know there are limits to this, but for example, the NYPD here in New York has a pretty robust machine learning operation for crime prediction and the like. And I'm wondering, what else you're doing aside from Bitcoin, and aside from obviously the back end, which I think people, as you mentioned, this has been a long time coming. I think the streamlining of permitting, for example, for businesses and domiciling is not something that you did after sending a tweet, and maybe that's something that gets lost in the headlines. And I just want to highlight that. But as we look forward, what else do you think you can do to make the governance of Miami more kind of tech forward?
So I think there's two things, and you mentioned one of them. We began a process of revolutionizing the way you interact with government as a 40-year-old, relatively young mayor of a major city who succeeded a last generation a public official. I wanted there to be a sort of a quantum leap in terms of our sophistication and our technological offerings to our residents, right? So we began with what you said was E-Plan. So E-Plan allowed you to submit plans, permits, any of those kinds of documents electronically. There was no need for paper. In fact, now you have to submit them electronically. You cannot actually submit them by paper. That was my first initiative, and we did that a couple of years ago. Then I challenged my administration. Now we got to create something called eStart. We want everyone to be able to start a business, which was actually very cumbersome, very difficult, and very expensive in the city from their phone or from their computer. We just launched it about 2 weeks ago in my state of the city in late January. So we began with E-Plans. We then went to eStart, and now we have Egov. And my CIO hates the names, by the way. He says that E is for like, it was like last generation thing. You know, you can't make it E, whatever. So I said, listen, I'm going to make you a deal. Once you complete Egov or E-City Hall, whatever you want to call it, I'll let you change all three of the names, okay? But essentially Egov and E-City Hall is the concept that you can, everything that you can do at City Hall, you can do virtually. And so you never have to ever go in a government building again, period, right? If you want to interact with somebody, you can interact by Zoom. You know what I mean? If you want to pay for something, you can pay for it electronically. If you want to submit documents, you can submit them electronically. The concept is you should never have to, you should be able to interact with your government from the comfort of your own home. And so that is the next generation that we're working on, and we're hoping to be able to do that. On the crime side, there's two things that are big initiatives of mine. There's actually three things. One of them is I brought as a councilman something called ShotSpotter to our city. I was an early adopter of it. And it essentially gives me the ability to know whenever a gunshot is fired in my city with GPS precision instantly. So with that knowledge, we've been able to, first of all, get people to hospitals approximately 1 minute to 2 minutes faster. Which has plummeted our homicide rate by about 40%. We've been able to recover ballistics. We have so that's one. The second part is we've started to integrate a camera system that will pan to the shot if there's a shot, so you have an actual emotion, and you have cameras on the scene, which obviously are needed because people's eyewitness testimony is not oftentimes sufficient, and people are often scared to testify. So this sort of defeats that. And then we've also included an artificial intelligence function in that as well, which allows us to identify people who may have committed a crime. So there, we one of the reasons why we did so well during the George Floyd protests was because we used technology, and we were always one step ahead of the protesters. And we drew a firm line in the sand and said, hey, we're gonna allow you to protest, and we're gonna allow you to protest and exercise your First Amendment rights. But there's a line right here in the sand that you can't cross. If you destroy property or if you hurt somebody, you're going to jail. And and we did that. And in effect, we created a national model. Everybody was like, oh, all these major cities are having a really hard time with it, but Miami's doing phenomenally well. And it's something that I'm really proud of.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that. One thing I have to ask before moving on to the next question is, do you have any Bitcoin? I know you told the journalist last week you don't, but have you, in the past week, have you bought any Bitcoin on your personal account?
So I always tell people that's a trick question, right? And I'll tell you why it's a trick question, because if I answer that I don't have Bitcoin, then people say, well, you don't have confidence in it. And if I say, well, I do have Bitcoin, and they're going to say, oh, all these things that you're doing is just to drive up the Bitcoin that you have, right? Mm-hmm. So the truth is that we are, I'm actually going to do something very public in my purchase of Bitcoin. I feel bad because every day that goes by, it's slipping away, but
you don't want to lose out.
Yeah, I'm gonna probably do something with Gemini and with Coinbase, and do something, buy a certain amount. I know both of their founders, the Winklevoss twins, have been phenomenal, extremely supportive from a legislative perspective, as well as good friends. And then, Brian and Fred from Coinbase have also been, exceptional. They've come down to Miami. I've had dinner with them, spent a good time with them, and they're brilliant people. So I want to kind of spread the wealth a little bit. But yes, I will be publicly buying it. Hopefully soon. Hopefully soon.
On both of those exchanges.
On both the exchanges. By the way, I was supposed to be with the CEO of Ripple last night, so unfortunately we couldn't get caught up. But I may have to buy it on 3 exchanges.
The people are going to get jealous. So this kind of ties into I think basically the way I'm thinking about this is you have this platform. You've had pretty tremendous success in a short period of time. You built the back end beforehand, but with the reason that I'm harping on this Bitcoin thing is that at a certain point, the adoption. So for example, with Bitcoin, that it competes with the US dollar. Like you mentioned, it exists as a hedge against the American financial system. And nothing against hedging. I'm definitely I like the technology, but I guess I wonder, do you worry about you're a mayor of a city? I think you have quite a promising future, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you for a long time.
Yeah.
But how do you deal with maintaining relationships with for example, if as you adopt something like Bitcoin, there are people in the U.S. government, there are regulators who won't be happy about that.
Sure.
And then on a kind of separate dimension, boring is another one that you're going to have, or I assume that not everybody in the state is going to buy into it immediately. And I wonder how you deal with the risk of basically causing antagonism with other governing bodies, officials, and so on.
Well, that's politics. I mean, that's what I do every day. That's if you're meek and if you don't have big ideas and if you're not willing to take risks, then you're not going to get very far in life, and you're not going to get very far certainly in public service. I knew that when I started courting some of these people that I might upset mayors in other cities. I try to do it in a very respectful fashion. I never talk bad about any mayor or talk bad about another city. I can highlight the differences, but I try to be very respectful and cordial. So that's something that could happen. In terms of Bitcoin, what I would tell the federal regulators and what I would tell the federal government is to get their act together. You know what I mean? I mean, Bitcoin has gotten the success that it's gotten because we've gone rampant with government spending. You know what I mean? If government spending wouldn't be so out of control, there wouldn't be a desire to have essentially an ancillary currency, right? And I think I think that's the big issue. And what you start seeing is more and more powerful people actually adopting Bitcoin, and that is driving the price of Bitcoin. I think, listen, if Apple came out tomorrow, and there's rumors that they will, and says, hey, you can pay for everything in Bitcoin. And if Amazon comes out tomorrow and says you can pay for everything in Bitcoin, guess what, guys? It's game over. I mean, there's literally nothing almost that you can't buy with Bitcoin. And those are just two decisions from two corporate boards away from something like that happening, because the technology of implementing it is incredibly easy. And if you talk to Brian and Fred, they'll tell you from Coinbase, they'll tell you 30 million people are holding crypto right now in America. That's 1/10 of the population. I don't know if those statistics are true or false, but again, the private markets will react and will make decisions based on how people will try to protect their wealth. And that's not something that I find surprising. It's something that I think is very rational, like you said. And, in terms of the boring, look, if I can build a tunnel and save my residents $950 million and I can do it successfully, and the richest person in the world wants to talk to me about it because he has a technology that can do it, you better believe I'm going to talk to that person. And if it bothers somebody, I'm sorry, because, my job as a fiduciary in the limited time that I have, because, I'm running, I have a re-election this year. If I'm re-elected, I have 4 more years. So I have 5 more years maximum. It's a finite existence as a public official. If you want to leave your mark and do things that are going to transform your city for generations to come, you have to take risks. You have to be bold, and you have to be able to live with the criticism that could come with that, with success and failure.
Mm-hmm. I guess I think we might be moving to some audience questions soon, to the extent that you have time. The final question from me is what's next? You mentioned that there's a kind of finite existence or a life cycle on your current office. Do you think you'll stay in politics, or are you going to go start a company with Elon Musk or Brian Armstrong? What are you going to do?
Well, I think what I have in front of me is first of all, I'm very fortunate that the city is doing very well. We've grown in the 3 years I've been mayor, 8.5%, 10.5%, and even 6.5% during a pandemic. We reduced crime by 25% last year and had the lowest homicide rate since 1954, the year before. Under my leadership, we have the highest bond rating the city's ever had. So the first thing I want to do, and the principal thing that I always do when I wake up, is to try to do my job to the very best of my ability. I have a re-election in November. If everything goes according to what's supposed to happen, I'm going to be the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors beginning in January of next year. So that's a big job. I'm going to be presiding over all the mayors in the United States from both parties and all parties. And so, that's an important and a job that it's going to require me to give, an intense effort. So those are the things that I'm focusing on now. Whatever the future holds, whether I go into private practice, private life, like you said, build a big company, big tech company, or whether I go stay into public service, are decisions that I'm going to have to make in the future.
Sure. Francisco, you want to take it from here? I guess before we go into questions, I just want to thank the mayor very much for joining us. I know he's busy, and we won't take up too much more of your time. Maybe just a couple more questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Mayor Suarez. I should mention here, Mayor, I was actually born in Miami, and I know Daniel has family in Miami, even though he's in New York. But all three of us, Mayor, you and I actually have parents of Cuban descent. Daniel's parents are from Venezuela. They come from countries that big government obviously changed the nature of those countries. I loved hearing that with this Egov, I may not ever have to walk into a government building again. Those are just, beautiful words to my ears. But in all respect, one question we have here from Heidi in California. Actually, she's in Washington State. She says, "Are you prepared?" Florida's a very purple state politically, and with a lot of tech entrepreneurs and tech companies coming from, say, the West Coast, California, other places to Miami. Do you think this risk tipping the scales to make Florida more of a blue state than a purple state?
Well, thank you, Heidi, for the question. And it's a question, obviously, I get often. And I would say a few things. First of all, we're not as purple as people think. We just, the president just won Florida by 400,000 votes. So that's a pretty large margin. But the second thing I would say is, and Daniel and Francisco can attest to this. I've never met a Cuban or a Venezuelan who is fleeing Cuba or Venezuela and wants to recreate it here in Miami. When they're leaving governments like Cuba and Venezuela because they're traumatized by what those governments have done to people's families, taking away their property, taking away their livelihood. I can tell you the people that I've spoken to that are tech founders are traumatized. They are leaving those areas traumatized. They are fed up with paying excessive taxes. They're fed up with governments that blame them for all the problems of society, particularly for government failing them in areas like crime and homelessness. And the last thing that they want to do is come to a place and recreate that dynamic again. They want to get as far away from that dynamic as possible. And frankly, they feel like there's a tremendously refreshing perspective on my end in terms of hearing my philosophy of life. And for me, it's easy because of the experiences that I had growing up.
Great. We also have one from a longtime member of ours, John Emirati, and who's actually in Silicon Valley. John says, please don't take this question as elitist or snotty, but there's an advantage that Silicon Valley has that Miami can't match. And he's asking it as politely as possible. He says, the story is often told out here that the academic nexus of Stanford and Berkeley is the fertile soil in which the Valley grew in the mid-20th century, and it remains the chief source of STEM talent. He's not an alum of either of these institutions, but as a guy who has hired, fired, and managed engineering talent for 45 years, he doesn't see University of Miami or FIU, those are fighting words, Mayor, as comparable centers of STEM scholarship. Does this concern you at all? And also, he wants to keep in mind he's very sympathetic to the escape from Silicon Valley. He just doesn't want us to ignore this issue.
No, it's probably one of the most important issues, right? So I often say I've been around politics since I was 2 years old. My dad first ran for office in 1979. I was literally 2, and I did my first political commercial. I sat on his lap and I said into a camera, "Vota por papi, por favor," which means vote for my dad, please. And so I've been around, politics my entire life. And what I've realized in politics is there's a difference between perception and reality. And for most people, perception is reality. And so the perception, without a doubt, is that FIU and University of Miami are not on the level of Stanford and Berkeley and Harvard and MIT. I will not debate that. I think that's indisputable. So I would say two things. First of all, we have to do a better job of telling our story. What do I mean by that? Well, most people don't know that FIU graduates the most Hispanic and African American engineers in the country. Most people don't know that the University of Miami has one of the most premier cancer research institutes in the world. Most people don't know that FIU is top 20 in the nation for patents. Top 20 in the nation for patents. So part of it is us not telling our story well enough. But I think the second part is, there's no barriers anymore. By the way, I have some news for the questioner, which is Silicon Valley is not going to be the premier place for much longer. I can tell you that. And I think part of it is because of the virtuality of life, right? We are now having this virtual conference, and now no one is tethered to the place. The location is no longer, or in proximity is no longer needed. So it's very easy for FIU to say, hey, tomorrow we're announcing a partnership with Stanford, and University of Miami say tomorrow we're announcing a partnership with Harvard or with MIT, and we're going to bring in their professors, or we're going to have our students take their classes virtually, or we're going to do a summer abroad program where instead of their being abroad in Europe, those kids from Stanford and from Harvard and from MIT are going to go abroad to Miami, and they're going to study here while they work for some of these tech companies. So I think the problem is easily fixable, partly by us telling our story and partly through partnerships, and it can be done quickly.
Well, that leads to let's probably make this our final question, given the time here. But actually, we've got two questions from someone here. One, the first question is, I think, a little bit related to what you were just talking about. Have you heard from any Miami businesses, such as realtors, private schools, et cetera, that have contacted you to help promote Miami to some of these other people? And then second question, have you heard from any Bay Area mayors?
So the first question is, yeah, I mean, I have the realtors are currently erecting a statue to me, and I told them, listen, don't build a statue. Just give me 0.02% of all your commissions, and I'll be happy. And but no, in seriousness, they're very, very happy.
Bitcoin, though, right?
What's that?
It has to be in Bitcoin.
Or absolutely. As soon as I open up the accounts, they've been extremely grateful and happy that in the pandemic, the city of Miami is doing phenomenally well. I forgot what the second question was.
The second question, have you heard from any Bay Area mayors?
So the closest that I've come to hearing from any of the Bay Area mayors was I was on a sort of a podcast called Clubhouse, where I was on with the mayor of Austin, Steve Adler, the mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, and myself. And I know all these mayors, obviously being the incoming president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I'm friends with all of them. I get along with them. Doesn't mean I always agree with them, but I certainly care for them, respect them, and understand how difficult their job is. The closest thing that came to anything like that was I got a text from London, who was a friend and is an Aspen fellow with me in the Rhodes program. And she said, hey, stop stealing all my techies. And I said, great to talk to you. I'm not stopping. that was about it. But no, they again, listen, they believe what they're doing is the right thing. I believe what I'm doing is the right thing. And I believe that over time, when we build our city and continue to build it in the way that we're doing with the metrics that we have, it will be evident that the Miami experience is the way to build a city.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mayor, so much for being with us today. We really appreciate your time. We know you're busy. We've been reading all about it. And we just want to give you maybe one last word if you want to say anything here.
Oh, I just want to thank you for this amazing opportunity. I want to thank Daniel for the great article that he wrote. And I think for us, the Miami experience that I was just talking about is based on some important fundamental principles. Free market, low taxes, less government intrusion, government as a facilitator and collaborator, not as an obstructor and denier. government that realizes its limitations, as opposed to government that believes that if they just take over everything, they can create equality. And what we know is that every time communism and socialism has been tried in the history of humanity, it has failed. And when you look at no further than Cuba and Venezuela, from which we all came from, you have Venezuela, which was the second wealthiest country in the world, and now 90% of its residents live below the poverty level. It's just tragic what has happened there. And Cuba is, it's a time capsule of the 1960s. I mean, it literally has not progressed. And, what's interesting is some of the policies of the prior president that a lot of people criticize with regard to Cuba seem to be working, because the Cuban government just recently said that they were going to allow for 200 categories of businesses to be opened as micro businesses. That's the way that an economy comes out of communism, when like Russia, when they realize that they just literally cannot compete anymore, and they're going to collapse society, and they're going to hurt their residents, even citizens, even more than they already are. That's the point where they have to give up.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mayor Suarez. Thank you, Daniel. Also, I want to just mention to everybody watching and listening, for more on Daniel's work and some of the great work being done by other writers at National Review, obviously visit nationalreview.com, and you'll see a little green section there at the top of the homepage called Capital Matters. That's going to give you all the financial and economic news coverage. You'll find Daniel there. He also edits the Capital Note, which is a weekly e-newsletter to kind of get a summary of all the week's news. And hopefully some of the big tech titans and others who are listening and watching or reading at National Review, and maybe connecting with Daniel for some future articles. So we'll look forward to that. Daniel, thanks for being with us today as well.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Mayor Suarez.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.